Japanese attack on the island of Oahu and the fleet at Pearl Harbor was cause for one of the most devastating defeats in American military history. Now see that day in Pearl Harbor as it happened. For those on the ground, military and civilian, the events of that day are still as clear as they were 60 years ago.
We were the most unprepared we could be.
Their shock gave way to horror as they witnessed thousands of American soldiers lose their lives.
We had deaths, a lot of deaths.
The confusion was compounded by rumors that spread throughout the island.
We were advised later in the day that the Japanese were landing at Pearl Harbor with ground troops.
Even those who were too young to help at the time vividly recall the turmoil.
Hearing the roar of airplanes, the explosions by this time were shaking our house.
And the Japanese who carried out the attack have their own perspective on that day.
Since it was my first mission, I was happy that my bomb did hit the Oklahoma.
It was a day that will live in infamy, and for the first time, you'll see it as those who were there, with rare and newly discovered color film taken on the day of the unprovoked attack. Experience an incredible moment in time. This is Pearl Harbor in color. 5 a.m. Sunday, December 7th, 1941. A Japanese fleet of 6 aircraft carriers sits 230 miles north of Hawaii. 350 pilots say their prayers before embarking on their mission to bomb Pearl Harbor. Among the airmen on the carrier Hiryu is 19-year-old Taisuke Maruyama.
Around December 1941, I was a member of the squadron on the carrier Hiryu. I was a second-ranked pilot then, but I didn't have a clear idea of what was going to happen in the future.
Maruyama's training had included the rigid Japanese indoctrination of the military spirit. All cadets were taught to obey their leaders and be willing to freely give their lives for Japan.
So our job was simple. It was to fight whenever they wanted us to fight.
The Japanese trained their pilots well. Planning the attack on Hawaii took almost a year. For months, they practiced low-altitude torpedo runs to attack battleships and high-altitude precision bomb drops to destroy their main target, the United States aircraft carriers.
Our goal is to sink the aircraft carriers, but if they aren't there, I'm going to sink a battleship.
From the United States' point of view, Pearl Harbor's geographical structure made it a perfect base for the Pacific Fleet. The narrow entrance and shallow waters of the harbor made it nearly impenetrable. Ford Island, on which the naval station is based and the American ships are anchored, is well protected. To the leaders of the American Navy, a full-scale attack by an enemy naval force was impossible. But the Japanese were rehearsing an air attack, and thanks to a geographical coincidence, they could practice with precision. Japan's Kameoke Bay is the twin sister of Pearl Harbor.
At Kamoike base in Kagashima, I did a lot of bombing training in a Type 97 bomber. Kagashima Bay has a structure that is very similar to Pearl Harbor. So I got a lot of training going from Kagashima Bay to Sakura Island, flying low and then attacking.
5:15 a.m. The pilots are given their final orders. Chief of the Navy, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, tells them that they are now responsible for the glory of the empire. The Japanese armada is now 220 miles north of Hawaii, safely out of range of American radar detection. 5:30 a.m. The first wave of airmen prepares for takeoff in their fighter planes and torpedo bombers. This assemblage comprises a strike force of over 180 aircraft. Meanwhile, 200 miles south of Oahu, the United States aircraft carrier Enterprise is launching 18 aircraft. They're headed for Ford Island in the center of Pearl Harbor. Estimated time of arrival, 8 o'clock. 6:10 a.m. 183 Japanese fighters, dive bombers, and high-altitude bombers are launched from carriers with split-second timing. All planes are in the air within 15 minutes. Their plan is to attack in 3 waves. The first would assault all military installations across the entire island of Oahu. The second would zero in on more specific targets. The third would take out fuel storage tanks, dry docks, and repair facilities. As morning breaks in Honolulu, overnight clouds disappear. It's another beautiful day in paradise, and work as usual for Henry Thettinger.
My father was a painting contractor, and we had a job right outside the main gate of Pearl Harbor called the Makalapa Housing Project. So, December 7th, some new pickup trucks came in over the weekend, so my father asked me if I'd go out and stencil the job numbers on side of the doors of the pickup trucks, and I said yes, I would. We lived maybe about a 25-minute drive down to Pearl from Waikiki. And it was a regular Sunday morning, and hardly any traffic on the road whatsoever.
7:02 a.m. While Henry drives to the harbor, 2 Army privates at a radar station on the North Shore pick up what appears to be a flight of unidentified aircraft 132 miles north of Oahu. They report the information to Fort Shafter, but the only person there is a new lieutenant who had just started training 4 days earlier. 7:20 a.m. The Japanese fleet, now 210 miles from Oahu, have launched a second wave, 268 assault aircraft. The inexperienced lieutenant at Fort Shafter feels certain that the unidentified planes are B-17s, scheduled to arrive from the mainland at 8 a.m. He instructs the radar station to shut down.
I got there about, I would say, about 7:30. When you went through the gates of any of those military bases, you were checked pretty thoroughly.
7:25 a.m. An early morning church service is being held at the Kaneohe Naval Base. Turret gunner Leon Kolb is getting ready for his day on the USS Oklahoma.
I'd been out to have my meals with the rest of the division and back in the gun turret and getting ready for the daily Sunday routine, in-port routine in the gun turret. I was rated a gunner's mate, second class petty officer, and I was stationed in the forward 14-inch gun turret.
The Oklahoma was one of the finest battleships in the American fleet, but a day earlier, she was moved from her customary defensive mooring on Battleship Row.
Normally, my ship would have been back where the Battleship Nevada in Arizona was. We belonged to that division, but the admiral aboard the Maryland was going to inspect our ship on the following Monday morning for readiness for war. To do that, we had all of the so-called double bottoments and storerooms and so forth opened up to air out, so it was more comfortable for the inspecting officers to go through and see the condition of the ship.
Opening the exterior portholes and interior hatches for fresh air made sense on December 6th, but on December 7th, 1941, it would leave the battleship dangerously vulnerable. 7:35 a.m. Japanese reconnaissance planes radio back to the Armada that the main American fleet is in Pearl Harbor. Approaching the island of Oahu from its mountainous eastern coast, the first wave of Japanese squadrons are not detected by radar. There is a dead zone caused by the mountains. Plus, American surveillance planes are not in the air on Sunday mornings. This facilitates the element of surprise. Admiral Yamamoto realizes he must eliminate the American naval strength in the Pacific if Japan is to be victorious. The Japanese believe that the American public will be discouraged by heavy losses and stay out of the war.
December the 7th, like any other Sunday morning, Mom in the kitchen making breakfast.
On this morning, 6-year-old Dorinda Makanoa Nalani is at home with her family. In 1941, she is one of just a few thousand Americans living in the Kingdom of Hawaii. The islands are not a state, but a territory of the U.S. They would not become one of the United States until 1959, 18 years later.
We were about the only civilians that could actually be in the harbor, and